Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Loreen HD, for the second episode of my chat with Courtney Brame, the founder and host of the podcast Something Positive for Positive People. If you've missed the first part of our chat, you can catch up by clicking on the card that will appear above and hear what his experience as a black man was contracting an incurable STI such as genital herpes. And I also asked him, did you have any expectations before opening up, and if so, did they end up matching the reality of what happened? But for this second video, in honor of Mental Health Week happening from May 18th till May 24th, I asked Courtney about self-love, if he related at all to the concept of self-love, if he practiced it, and if so, how. Like, spoiler alert, of course he does. And I also asked him about his 5 core values that he really centers his life around. So besides enjoying this chat, let us know in the comments below if you relate to the concept of self-love and if you practice it, and if so, how. And also let us know anything that has helped you with your mental health and staying in a good place with your mental health throughout your experience of being diagnosed with an incurable STI. And if you're still struggling, which is absolutely okay, and I would say pretty common, feel free to either DM Courtney or DM me for support. And if you need actual medical help, there's a few links below of resources that you can check to get that kind of help. So without further ado, here's our chat. Self-love, happy Mental Health Week, and see you next week for the last episode of our chat with Courtney. I'm not gonna tease, no spoiler alert, you're just gonna have to check back in next week. I want to move the conversation towards the relationship, like how important the relationship that we have with our own selves is in this whole journey, and how much emphasis there is on disclosing and being sort of accepted or rejected by another partner, where, from my perspective, it's much more helpful to think of dating more as like you're meeting someone, you're connecting with them, you're getting to know them, they're getting to know you. Like, stop thinking about the outcome of accepting, rejecting before you even know if you like this person, but it's sort of like this big dark cloud over our head. But yeah, we tend to fixate on the relationship with other people and completely overlooking the fact that it's also about the relationship with ourselves. Like, I have been cultivating an image of myself for the past, I think I contracted it when I was like 26. So for the past 26, Loreen has built an image of who Loreen is, which I, look at every day and think of when I think of myself. And all of a sudden I contract this virus. And the relationship, how it's hitting my relationship with myself for the past 26 years, that is so much harder for me and so much more work than actually, the relationship with someone that I'm just meeting and that I have a crush on and that I'm looking to connect with. And so from my feed, at least on Instagram, I would love to see what your feed looks like. Actually, sometimes we should like swap and see what it looks like to be on each other's feeds. But from my feed, I follow a lot of like mental health accounts that talk about self-love a lot. But I feel that it's always represented through a more like feminine aspect, as if it's something that women practice or should practice. And I don't see a lot of like self-love for men. Do you practice self-love? Do you relate to the concept of self-love at all?
I do, yes. I've realized for a very long time that there may have just been like a negligence from myself, just completely neglecting my own needs. And it's shown up in relationships, it's shown up in family dynamics, it's shown up in friendships, to where it seems like everyone else's priorities are your priorities. And then for whatever reason, let's say a relationship ends or a job ends or a friendship ends, and then you're kind of stuck with this void of needing to fill your time with something, or you have to do something, like you need purpose. And for a while, I think that my purpose was prioritizing the needs of those around me. And that's kind of where I got my fulfillment out of. It was after spending enough time with those voids and doing something different, I realized that I had a pattern that I was breaking, because now the priority is Courtney's needs, right? And I've learned that in loving myself and taking care of myself and honoring my own boundaries, which that's still a challenging thing, because now going from not even knowing what boundaries were to having to not only create them, but also uphold and enforce them and communicate them to others, and then remember that you have boundaries and identifying different ways that they can be violated or pushed to their limits. All of this has been challenging, but the more that you practice it, the more you are reinforcing that you love yourself. I put up these boundaries not only for you, but also for myself, so that I can continue to care for you, love you, support you, and prioritize you after I've been prioritized. I think that one of the biggest lies that we've ever been told is that the world doesn't revolve around us, because in a way it kind of does. If we were to make our world revolve around everything else, like how can we perform to the best of our ability? If my cup's half full, how can I fill yours up? If mine is constantly being refueled by me honoring my boundaries and taking care of myself, I'm able to best love you to the best capacity of me being able to love myself. So as far as the social media feed goes, I do not see a lot of men. And when I've made call outs, just being like, hey, are there any guys in this space that talk about, similar topics? And some people have sent pages my way, but the page is more so focused on like a post here and there. And it's usually like a repost from a woman. So there's not very much of the masculine perspective, at least on my feed, that talks about self-love. And it's been something that I've had to learn from the women I follow, like how they're using this and how it applies to them, where I might not take like a bubble bath with candles and sage and have crystals and things like that, but I can honor what I say I'm going to do. I can be consistent in what it is that I'm doing. I can pick up hobbies and do the things that make me feel fulfilled. And those are acts of self-love. And another thing that I've learned recently is an act of self-love is not is not self-hate action, if that makes sense. So being mindful of not only our thoughts, like if we can't control our thoughts, we can definitely control our words and how we speak about ourselves. So I've been practicing not saying things that are negative about people or about myself specifically. Like self-deprecating humor is definitely a thing. But if you think your thoughts are powerful, like watch what happens when you start to shift your language around how you talk to yourself, because the words that we use are also tools for liberation, peace, or violence and oppression, right? So the way that we would talk to ourselves, or the way that we are choosing to not talk to ourselves, can also be an act of self-love. Like I'm not going to talk down on myself if I miss a shot, if we're playing sports, or if I mess up in a conversation, or if I stumble over words, and these are just the smallest things. It's just a matter of being gentle with yourself.
But I like that, because this is like, for the people who will listen to this, it's a very good starting point, and it's a very accessible one. Just like pay attention to the way that you're talking to yourself, and pay attention to your thoughts. Not just like feeding positive thoughts to your brain, but also trying to censor the judgmental ones, or the ones that are a bit more negative. Back to what you were saying around, men practicing self-love. I don't even know if they call it self-love, but there's two friends of mine, one of which I actually had on my channel. His name is Brian Stacy, and he was the co-founder of a sexual health app called Beam, and his partner now professional partner, Dominic Cortuccio, they have a website called Do Inner Work. And Brian was diagnosed with testicular cancer and chlamydia the same day. And on the interview on my channel that I did to him was a little bit like, how did you process your cancer diagnosis, and how did you process chlamydia? And how, one, he was very open and he received a lot of support from people, which was the cancer diagnosis. And he was talking about how he can play the cancer card. But the chlamydia one, there was like no mention of that whatsoever. And like we talked about that dynamic, and they do some work around how men can sort of reframe their masculinity and feel better in their masculinity without the societal pressure of expressing it in a certain way. It doesn't really get very deep into sexual health and STIs. I think one of the founders had a sex addiction, actually, which is one of the causes why he started. Anyways, I'll send you all that stuff. Maybe you'll be interested. But I really like your points around, how you talk to yourself, making sure that you're feeding positive thoughts and blocking the negative ones, and also boundaries. And I think boundaries are something that we often, especially in the past few years, we understand the importance of boundaries, but we don't understand like the depth that they have or that they can have for us. Did you have any of that understanding prior to getting diagnosed? Or was the diagnosis sort of like a snowball effect that led you into that space? And
So I try not to give herpes itself too much credit, but I will say that the experiences that came after my diagnosis have really transformed me. I think that what happens with a lot of us is our identities are so interconnected with our sexuality and who we think we are solely as how we're able to express our sexuality. It becomes just completely shattered after an STI diagnosis, especially one that's incurable, especially one so stigmatized like herpes, right? And once that happens, you struggle with who you are. You struggle with who you were, who you thought you were, who you thought you were going to be. And you have to begin to mold a new character for yourself, right? So at the time of before my diagnosis, I valued having multiple sexual partners. It was just like something that I liked. I didn't have a real reason for it. It was very unconscious. And then once I got my diagnosis, it was like, oh, I am not going to have as many sexual partners as I thought that I was going to have. And it made me feel like I needed to then slow down significantly, which, I've never really had a lot of partners simultaneously. But at this point, it was like, okay, Courtney, get a girlfriend and marry her, because that's going to be the best that you can do at that point in time, right? So after dating and just realizing that there are still incompatibilities with your diagnosis, without your diagnosis, like around just religion or spirituality or how to raise kids, if you want kids, marriage, whether or not you want that, like going through enough of that, and even in dating and not dating, I would say, made me realize that there were a lot of things with me that I was operating unconsciously on that needed to be sorted through. Maybe 2 or 3 years into my diagnosis, I would say I began journaling. And in journaling, the big thing was just starting with why. If I have any sort of an intense feeling, let's say I feel anger. Okay, why am I angry? Okay, this happened. Okay, what's the meaning of this thing that happened? And you start to write out. It's like there's a shortcut from brain to neck to shoulder to arm to pen to paper, that it doesn't give you time to bullshit yourself or second guess anything. So the truth is right there coming out, and you're writing it and you're reading it and you see it and you can't unsee that. So one of the big things was just that I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I wanted to be, right? And so it took for me to begin the process of looking for information, like looking for answers. I started looking for answers in self-help books. I was listening to podcasts, and there were several bits and pieces of consistent information that were coming across, one of which was, in fact, boundaries. In the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by, I believe his name is Dr. Robert Glover. In this book, they talk about nice guy syndrome and covert contracts, right? So a covert contract is best described as I have an expectation of you that if I do everything that you want me to do, if I'm nice to you, then at some point you'll give me what I want, and you have no idea of what it is that I want. So this could be sex, it could be money, it could be a relationship, it could be a date, it could be a kiss, anything, right? And I realized that a lot of that comes with a lot of resentment there. When you expect from people and they don't deliver on your expectations, you become resentful, and this turns into like something that just kind of gets swept under the rug until you trip over that rug and all of this stuff comes out, and before you know it, you're raging out, you're blowing up on coworkers and family and friends, you're breaking up with girlfriends, quitting jobs, doing those kinds of things. And once I saw that, I began to see, okay, boundaries. And then the more investigating I did, the more I got to kind of see, okay, you have to put yourself first. You have to be selfish to some extent. And that's what it looked like. Like selfish for so long had been a bad word. Like, you're selfish. You don't want to share your cookies. You're selfish. You don't want to come pick me up. You don't want to let me use your car. You've got all this privilege or all of these things that I don't have, and you're selfish for not sharing those things with me. Whereas being selfish in terms of honoring, creating your boundaries and being consistent with who you are, that was sort of the narrative. The word selfish just needed a little bit of adjusting, because in my experience, selfish was a negative thing. But in reality, objectively, being selfish has multiple different interpretations. But the consistent one was, you have to identify your priorities. So identifying your priorities, honoring those priorities and those boundaries. In the book No More Mr. Nice Guy, they talked about this concept of integrity, being an integrated man. It's not being an alpha male. It's not being your chest, being the biggest, the strongest, the loudest, the best dressed or anything, but it's more so operating from a place of integrity, where you identify what your values are and then you operate from that place. So starting out, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, my values began as freedom, understanding, and growth. Those were the three. And over time, those three evolved from freedom to liberation. And freedom means freedom from something, liberation means the freedom to do anything. Um, Understanding evolved into peace, and then growth evolved into evolution, and then two more kind of crept their way in there: connection and transparency. So these are the five values that I operate from, and it makes decision making so easy, because it's a matter of, okay, does the thing that's being presented to me, the relationship, the opportunity, the whatever, whatever it is that may be in front of me, does it line up with those five values? You know, is it going to illustrate or highlight what my values are if I move forward in that direction, or is it not? And so when you have like a core system of values and your beliefs and behaviors come from that place, it makes being in integrity so much easier. So even my boundaries now, they come from that place of all five of those things, and upholding them, while that may be a challenge still, you know, just dealing with fighting selfishness in itself, I know that I'm able to reinforce the importance of those boundaries because of my values.
Like, to me, the difference between selfishness is like selfishness, you're almost not aware of your actions. You are dismissing people because you're not necessarily seeing their need, versus with boundaries, you have an awareness of what it is that you want to prioritize in your life, and you make the conscious choice to follow those priorities and to leave aside, or at least sort of put back the things that don't fall into your priorities. So for me, what I'm hearing from you is that you did some work of understanding what are the type of things, energies, emotions, people, experiences that I want to welcome in my life. What are the sort of key 5 principles or values at the core of that? And then I need to now, once I have this understanding and this philosophy of life, let's call it like that way, how do I align my behaviors with that philosophy of life? And then some people will get hurt because, we've been friends for 20 years, but every time we've been friends, it's just about like going to the pub and getting trashed. And now I'm trying to like realign in a way that takes me a little bit away from those behaviors, or like lessening those behaviors. And so your friend's going to be like, what the fuck? But that's part of the process, but it's done in a way that is, you are aware of your priorities, and you're just like enacting them. So I think this is very beautiful.
Yeah. And just to kind of add to what you just said about like going to the pub and getting shit faced with friends, I think that when we're doing this work on ourselves, like we all as people are essentially like mirrors for one another. So just imagine like the clearer your mirror is, the more of a person, the more another person can see themselves in your transparency. So it's like I'm willing to see all of myself, and I want to be able to show people all of themselves, right? When you come into a space with someone, being able to see all of yourself can either feel overwhelming and you run away because you don't want to, like there are pieces that you just aren't prepared to look at, or it can be welcoming and warming because it's so safe. And I think that that's one of the things that you may have come across in your advocacy in the space, of people just being so inspired by you, and they feel safe and open with sharing some really vulnerable information with you. And it's because once you do the work, it's like you're putting Windex on yourself and making your glass, your mirror, clear enough for people to feel seen and feel safe. Not everyone's ready for that, right? So the people who may be a little less willing to look at their whole selves are more so drawn to the people who aren't that open, who don't have the clearest of mirrors, and they're willing to look at only what it is that they want to see. So that's kind of where we get into the going to the pub and getting shit faced as sort of a distraction from being willing and able to see all of ourselves and show other people around us all of themselves as well. So it's important to take that step when you're ready, because like going to the pub and getting shit faced is still fun at the end of the day. But being able to step into it and do it, from a conscious perspective, knowing, okay, I'm doing this because it's fun. I'm not doing this because I'm running away from something or distracting myself from seeing all of myself. Like that, those are just two completely different experiences.